That's exactly now. So who comes now can slip in quietly and listen. My name is Annette Mutschler-Siebert. I'm a member of the board of the DAV, of the German Bar Association, and in that capacity I'm really happy to welcome all of you here to that first DAV workshop at the PILnet conference. As our president has already said in his greeting this morning, it's a first for us, that cooperation with PILnet, and we're really excited about it, and we're excited about discussing with all of you who are involved in the pro bono space already. Why did the DAV decide to have such a forum at the PILnet conference? Well, there's basically, for this workshop, there's two reasons, actually. The first one is because the DAV believes in the importance of granting access to legal assistance, irrespective of the circumstances, of the importance of upholding the rule of law, irrespective of the circumstances. And that is probably more important today than it ever was before. So that's one of the reasons we decided to have that forum, and we'll have 3 consecutive workshops building up on each other. The first one you're sitting in now is concentrating on, and that's the second reason for us doing it today, on our baby, on European lawyers in Lesvos, an initiative that has been founded by the DAV and the CCBE, the International Bar Associations Association, together. So it's a very particular project. It's the first instance of such a project being founded by bar associations, by the legal profession as such. And it has become a very important project for the DAV and for the CCBE. And actually for me professionally as well. I'm not in the asylum law space, but on the board of ELIL, and so have gotten some insights into how it works, and it's very, very impressive. And we'll talk about that a bit later on, and Phil can tell us all about it. What ELIL is about, you've heard quite a bit in Phil's Spark talk earlier on. It is exactly about upholding the rule of law. It's exactly about making people aware of their rights, telling them what their rights are. And it's been done on the ground. So that's one particularity as well of this project. It's in the camp, in the situation of need, and it's been done pro bono. So it's all our colleagues internationally who are collaborating across borders to help people in need to know what their legal rights are. What we want to do in this workshop is looking a bit closer at how it has been set up, what the process was, what the thoughts behind the creation were, why was it created the way it is, what worked well. We'll talk about successes, of course. Not only about successes, also about challenges. You can imagine it's not always easy to, for example, fund such an initiative. We've met challenges in getting financial support. It's not state funded, so it has to find sponsors that are willing to support. What are the lessons learned from that project? What can we take out of the project for other projects? Is it a model project for other projects? Or does it have to develop itself into something broader than European lawyers in Lesvos? Does it have to be European lawyers across borders? So that's kind of the topics we will and want to talk about. And we'll start off with 3 wonderful speakers surrounding me here on the panel. And they can give you their first-hand impressions about the project and their experiences with it. Let me just briefly introduce who's sitting next to me. So to my right, there's Noemi Alarcon. I asked her how to pronounce it. I think it was okay. She's a lawyer at NAV Consultadores in Malaga in Spain, and she's an expert in migration law. Since 2015, she's also vice president of the Migration Committee of the CCBE, and in that capacity, she's been involved in the creation and setting up of ELIL. So she can give you first-hand experience from that period as well. She's also teaching a lot, for example, at the Council of Europe on migration law. So she's a real expert, and I'm looking forward to discussing with her. Then on the right of Noemi, we've got Phil Worthington. I don't really have to introduce him anymore. He's been on the panel already this morning. He's given us Bark talk. Phil is the CEO of ELIL, so he is the heroic person who's really putting it all into operation. He's been doing that since 2016, and actually he's qualified as a lawyer before and has worked 6 years in London in big law firms, and then kind of decided to change his life and to become the CEO of ELIL, starting as a volunteer, I think, and then being convinced to become the CEO. And actually the volunteer bit is something he shares with Kurt, who also came to Lesvos first as a volunteer, Kurt Brugman, and saw that there was need for a project like ELIL, need for legal assistance for the refugees who just don't know what asylum law requests from them, what gives them a right and what doesn't give them a right, and saw the need for that, and then came back to Germany, and in his position as the CEO of the German bar at the time, kind of became the father of the whole project. Let me say that. He would never say that, but actually that's the case. So he really started the whole process of collaboration between the DAV and the CCBE to set it up, so that in the end we have that wonderful project working now. Kurt is a lawyer and a historian. He's got experience in working in NGOs as well, and all three of them can tell you about their experiences in setting up, operating, and further developing ELIL. So we will start with short opening statements. I'm saying short because I mean it. And then the idea really is to go into a discussion with all of you in the room who've got relevant experience in the space, and to figure out what we can take from the project and what we can further improve in the project as such. So without further ado, I would ask Kurt to start with his short opening statement.
Okay, thank you very much, Annette. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's wonderful to have a chance to talk a bit about the European Lawyers in Lesvos project. Actually, I'm probably the person definitely here, probably in the room, who knows least about migration law, because I don't know anything about migration or refugee law. My specialty kind of is to organize things, and that's why I'm the one invited for talking a bit about setting this project, which became a small NGO, up. Before I maybe give some personal recollection of how the project started, I would like to say that while I listened to Phil Worthington in the morning, of course I knew what you were saying, Phil, and I listened to you, and I remembered the keynote speech from yesterday, Motley's Law, which was so different. Yesterday we had a superhero lawyer who is flying around the world, saving people, telling stories about people. And then we had this modest guy who was standing there with black and white slides, presenting numbers and facts and figures. And isn't it wonderful that the legal profession actually is so diversified, that we have so different types of people in this wonderful profession? And I think this is one of the things that I will take back from this PILnet conference, which is just wonderful. European Lawyers is probably not a superhero project, although all those volunteers who actually work and make everything happen are heroes in a way. But what they do is what they do in their home law firms as well. They give legal advice, period. They do it in very high quality, and according to professional standards that actually are important to us and that probably differentiate us from other players in the field. Because when we talk about European lawyers today, we will probably also talk about the fact that in this crisis in 2015, 2016, those of you who heard me yesterday heard me say that I don't like to talk about the crisis as being called a refugee crisis, because it was not a refugee crisis, it was a crisis of public administration dealing with a situation. In this crisis, there were also many, let's say, hobby lawyers, people from all over the world who might have read a book about migration law and came to Lesvos and said, here I am, and I'm going to counsel you. And in that situation, Annette, I actually was in Lesvos around the turn of 2015, 2016. I was there not as a lawyer, but as a kind of regular volunteer. There were so many people needed at those times when up to 5,000 refugees and migrants actually arrived at the borders to do all that work that was done all over Europe by volunteers helping to kind of alleviate the crisis, at least in a certain way. I was in Lesvos. I was actually working in first reception. I unloaded trucks with socks and underwear and doing things like this. And I saw, when I was there for a couple of weeks, that there were doctors, there were nurses, there were carpenters, and there were many people from various professions who actually exercised their profession in Lesvos and then on other places, and they did what they could do best to help those people who arrived at those times. And I looked around and I realized there were no lawyers. There was not a single lawyer who said, I'm a specialist in asylum or migration law, and I can help you with the process. And I heard stories from migrants and refugees who actually got their information about legal issues, usually through their mobile phone. They arrived in Lesvos and they knew things, even I, as a stranger to migration law, knew were totally wrong. And so at this point, I thought, wouldn't it make sense to ask lawyers to go to Lesvos and other places to actually do what they can do best, give legal advice. Give legal advice to sort things through with the people who arrived. I was in the fortunate position as CEO of the German Bar Association to have an organization to ask if they thought this idea was an idea to follow up on. And in a time in early 2016, when probably everybody in Germany, no matter what profession they were from, said, we have to do something. We have to do something. The German Bar Association said, yes. We then said, this is, of course, not a German thing. This is a European crisis. So why don't we talk to the CCBE, the umbrella organization of all the bars and law societies in Europe, and President Schellenberg, whom you have heard today early in the morning at a conference of the CCBE in Vienna, asked the bar presidents of all the organizations, would you mind helping us and collaborating with us in setting up a project? Only for a couple of months. We don't want to build a stable organization. We don't think we need to build a stable organization because this kind of crisis will probably be over quite soon, because we believe in the European governments to set up structures that the crisis would be over soon. And all the bar presidents said, yes, good idea, we give some money and we give some help. And then this ad hoc project was actually started as a project which we thought would probably last some 10 months. The first volunteers arrived a few weeks or a few months later. One of them, Thomas Oberhäuser, is in the audience, and I think you will share your experience either now or later in one of the sessions even, or now and in one of the sessions. And we saw it was possible, it was needed, and it was actually a very good thing for those pro bono lawyers to come. We did a few things before we started that were important that I want to mention, and then my initial statement should be over. One of the important things was we said, and we went to the Greek government, we are willing to provide legal advice, but we will only do it if we get access to the Moria camp. We are not going to do this on the field somewhere or somewhere on the island of Lesbos. You have to let us in. You have to give us unrestricted access to the people who will be our clients. This was actually not very easy to reach because at those times, after the EU-Turkey deal, the Moria camp was for some weeks actually closed. And it was a detention camp for a couple of weeks. Now the doors are open again and have been open again. And it's not a detention camp anymore. But after March 2016, there was a time when it was very difficult for the Greek authorities to imagine that lawyers would go in there and give legal advice. Why? And don't blame the Greek authorities for this. You could blame any authorities for this, because lawyers are troublemakers. Why should you leave troublemakers in a place like Moria, which is so difficult to handle anyways? Look at it through their perspective, and you at least can understand. It's not correct, it's not right, but you can understand. But through the help of European bar presidents and through the legal profession in Greece, we reached a memorandum of understanding, a contract with the Greek government that said that the volunteer lawyers with European lawyers would have unrestricted access to the Moria camp, which in a way I think, Phil, we always had one way or another, so that now there are containers in which lawyers can actually work. To then abbreviate something that I could elaborate on quite more, many volunteers came. We were actually overwhelmed by the amount of volunteers from all over Europe who were willing to sacrifice 3-4 weeks of their annual leave to go to Lesvos and give legal advice. And when, after a couple of months, we saw that on the one hand, the problems, of course, did not become less. And when we, on the other hand, saw that there are so many volunteers and potential volunteers who would like to contribute to the project, then the German Bar Association and the CCBE decided to turn this into a more stable organization. And now it is a German company, charitable company, trying to get stable funding to become kind of a sustainable and stable organization, giving pro bono legal advice to refugees and migrants on the European outer borders. And very last sentence, without all the volunteers, it would never have possible. But without Phil Worthington as the program as the managing director of the program, who was so kind to accept the offer to be employed by European lawyers, it would never have been where it is right now. And that's where we are right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kort, for that very impressive first-hand report. That's the thing we want to give to you today, the experience of the people who have built up the project. So let me hand it over to Noemi, who can tell you about the international perspective, about the umbrella organization of the bar associations and how they became involved and how they started bringing their experience into that project.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you so much to invite me and to share my experience with all of us. And as Vice Chair of the Migration Committee of CCB, we are a young committee in this organization. We started as experts in 2014, and we started as a committee or as a group of experts in 2015. So it was just in the middle of the peak of the so-called or badly called refugee crisis, as Kort say. It's not the refugee crisis; it's the crisis of a bad administration of EU administration, and we thought all this problem. Each day we had news about what's happening in Greece, and also what could happen not only what's happening in Greece, also what could happen in any part of EU countries or countries that are in the south border. So the system will absolutely collapse, and with this scenario, we wanted to act in one way or another, and we started to speak how we can help the Greek legal order and to improve the gaps that they have. And as Phil has explained, the first thing is that, the first point that we start is that there was a gap in the there was no legal assistance in the first instance. So migrants and refugees didn't have access to a lawyer, so they didn't have access to justice. As you know, the DNA of lawyers, of course, have solidarity, social rights in their DNA, and access to justice. Without access to justice, we don't have access. Finally, there is no rule of law. And that is one of the, the general principle of our organization in CCBE. So we decided to do something. And we have this big opportunity because the DAV offer us the beginning of the project now offer us the possibility how we're going to act, what we can do. And we start to work together with this beautiful and wonderful idea to have a small project, because it is a small project. But sometimes with small acts, with small projects, we can show to the rest of the world, and in this case, to show to the EU institution and EU countries that lawyers were unified in this matter, and that we can also work together and do something to help these persons. I don't like to speak about migrants, refugees, because finally we are speaking about persons and their access to justice. I was in the part, not the glamorous part, because I started more in the, in the part of the administrative organization of the project and how to start. Because to start the project, we need first to convince the other delegations of the countries that are part of CCBE. So huge work to convince the other, because sometimes migration was seen that it was a political issue, not a legal issue. So convinced that it was a legal issue and that lawyers have to be in these humanitarian causes or humanitarian crises. And after convincing our members, which we need to try with the not very pleasant thing, it's to fund this project and to have people funding the project. So when finally we put all this in place, we launched the call for volunteers, and of course we have some requirements. It's not that we accept any volunteers just because they are lawyers, because we needed lawyers that were specialized in migration or asylum law, and of course that they could speak in English, just in order to organize ourselves, and plus if they could speak language that are from the countries of origin of the migrants or refugees, that it's a plus. I mean, it's not a requirement. So we receive, surprisingly, thousands and thousands of applications from all around the European countries. It was amazing. We did a huge work because, to tell you the truth, I'm not a specialist in human resources, but it was a huge work because I don't remember well, but I think that each 2 weeks or something like that, or each month, we have to have meetings by phone. To organize all these people that we're going to deploy to Lesbos. One thing that I want to share with you is that one of the first idea that we have is that this project, if we were organizing this project, okay, it was for Greece, but with the idea, we bear in mind that possibly in the future, another EU country, or one of the countries that are observers in CCBE, could have the same need or the same necessity to be helped by lawyers. I just want to remind that in Greece they have also lawyers, but they were collapsed and the system were absolutely collapsed. So that's the reason that we need to have more people doing this work. And I just want to remind you that the same things are doing in other professions, but not only nurses, doctors, and everything. I mean, also the European institutions right now are taking people from all around Europe, for example, for Frontex, for other EU agencies, from EASO, and they need experts in migration and asylum from all around Europe. It's not something just local based, it is something very European. So the idea was also to have this project for 1 year. And at this time, we're going to see if we're going to follow or in which kind of organization we're going to transform the project in the case that they were working well. And that's the case right now, that it is a stable NGO. And the good experience it was, and the thing that we wanted to share with the rest of EU countries is first that lawyers are solidar. I mean, the solidarity of the legal orders and the lawyers. And also it's important, I think, this experience that we have a common approach that finally, if you want that this EU asylum system works they have in the form, in the manner that the institution has worked and imagined the new system of this CS approach. I mean, the common system, the common asylum, European asylum system. So it is also good to have this common approach done by European lawyers. Also, as Phil told this morning, the ELIL project attend 3,466 cases, so more than 18,000 people attended. That shows that it was a real need, that it was not a fiction that we invented because of the crisis, and we want to be very, a charity and to say, oh, we are very charitable. But that's what not the point. I mean, it was a real need to be there. And also to highlight among the EU authorities and institutions that in case of humanitarian crisis or humanitarian cases, we need to have lawyers because it's absolutely necessary. And finally, also as a very good experience, is that in migration law and asylum law, when I speak about migration, I also put asylum as a whole. Right now, we live in a globalized world. You just have to watch the news each day. You see the caravan in, the Honduran caravan that go through the United States. They cross a lot of countries that were the same in the European Union. It's people there are people that are crossing a lot of countries, not only to arrive to the EU, also to arrive to another, because there are second movements that happening among the EU states. So right now the lawyers have to be very connected and linked to each other, because you have to trace and to give a good advice. You need to trace the person, the migrants, because maybe they arrive to Greece, maybe they arrive to Italy or to Spain, but finally they don't decide to stay there in this country. They decided to go to France, to Germany, anywhere else. So I think this project also shows that there is a necessity that the legal profession, the legal orders also has to be connected in order to help and to give a good advice and a good defense to these people. That's all from my side.
Thank you so much. And you just see all the enthusiasm that goes into this project. That's what really got me drawn into it as well. There's so much importance behind what ELIL is doing. And now comes the one person who can tell you all about what's happening behind the scenes and how it is in the day-to-day work. Phil, please.
Thanks, Annetta. It's a relatively rare event that I'm in a room with people who know more about certain aspects of European lawyers than me, and it's interesting to hear Claude and Noémie's viewpoints on the process of setting it up, because my kind of arrival and engagement with European lawyers came a little bit later, after the first 2 or 3 months of kind of behind the scenes setting it up. They needed somebody to begin the project, and as Claude mentioned, kind of for a couple of months on Lesvos, and by, luck and happenstance and various other things, I was there volunteering at the time. So I began this role, and it's interesting to hear the kind of the counterpoint from the Brussels and Berlin perspective of the very important imperatives to set this up, and obviously the very great challenges, and the actual reality that kind of was confronting us on kind of day one of the project, which was we were sharing a small office with another NGO on Lesvos. At that point, we didn't have access to the camp. We didn't really have anything set up, and our first volunteer arrived, a lady named Chrysula, who then came back 4 or 5 times subsequently, and then finally became our legal coordinator. And we kind of were sitting together in this office, not really sure what we were supposed to be doing. And so we decided that logically the best thing to do would be, we decided to sweep the floor together. So we cleared the floor, we made everything nice and clean, and then we're like, okay, now what do we do? And just because you've already heard quite a lot from me, so I'll try and keep it brief. But there were 3 kind of main challenges to start with, I think. We had to convince 3 very important entities, bodies of people. We had to convince the authorities, who obviously control access to the camp and kind of operation in the camp. We had to convince the other NGOs, who inevitably were maybe not suspicious, but certainly cautious about an organization, a new organization like ours, setting up. And probably most importantly, we had to convince the volunteers. And as Claude mentioned, Thomas is here, we have at least 2 more former volunteers as well. And for people who are giving up their time, taking leave, taking unpaid leave to come to Lesvos, of course, they are expecting certain processes and to be able to do certain things. So we were in a situation whereby it was a very quickly changing situation, a very urgent need, and we were kind of building things from the beginning. The authorities, as you can imagine, were and are in certain situations, there are challenges there. As Claude mentioned, the perspective of the authorities in relation to lawyers is that we're troublemakers, even though the reality is actually different, of course, and we actually in many cases facilitate the smooth running or the smoother running of the asylum process. I'm not sure anybody would describe it as smooth, but at least it is more efficient and more effective when you have a lawyer, and I'm absolutely convinced about that fact, because we fix problems. We identify issues before they happen and fix them. So rather than somebody waiting 6 months to get their vulnerability decision uploaded onto the system, to then delay their process by 6 months, if they have a lawyer, that can be done very quickly. So it speeds everything up. It's fair to say that's still an ongoing discussion with the authorities about whether lawyers are a good or bad thing in the camp, but at least we convince them to tolerate us and to give us space in the camp to work from. The NGOs, again, completely understandably, people like UNHCR were thinking, okay, well, we don't know this organisation. They've no track record. We don't know what they're going to do. Obviously, we came with ideas of how we wanted to do things, but we had not ever delivered. So I remember a meeting with the head of the head of the office, the UNHCR office in Lesvos, and she basically said, well. And this was before we'd started working in the camp, kind of the 2 weeks beforehand. She was like, well, this all sounds great, but let's have a meeting when you've actually been in the camp and done the work, and then we can really, see. And, of course, that is a completely understandable perspective, and I think it's something that maybe I hadn't necessarily factored in so much at the start, because you kind of think, okay, we're all on the same team, everybody will be positive, but of course, you need to prove yourself first. And I'm happy to say that now that has been achieved. UNHCR send us lots and lots, too many referrals. The other organisations, IRC, MSF, MDM, Oxfam, all support us with and send us referrals. And we've managed to convince the established players that actually what we do is very important. Convincing the volunteers, well, maybe we'll have some feedback from the audience on that. I hope we have put in place a robust and rigorous professional system whereby volunteer lawyers can come and very quickly be integrated into the team and to understand what their role is, what they do, and to work as effectively as they can for the period they're here. We provide training materials before people come. We have a 1 or 2 day induction from myself and induction from our legal coordinator, then a couple of days of shadowing existing lawyers. So it takes maybe 4 to 5 days to really get up to speed before people really take over cases themselves. All of which has the aim of trying to make sure that the work we deliver, as Cord mentioned, is equivalent to the standard of the work that will be delivered by the lawyer back in their home country. Clearly, maybe not without the comforts of the office and everything else. I don't think anybody would describe our container in Moria as comfortable, but at least the work is the same level of professionalism and that the applicants, the clients, get the same level of service. I think if we weren't able to do that and if we had to look ourselves in the mirror and say we can't do that, then that would be a kind of an existential issue, because that is the whole aim of what we're trying to do, is to provide that quality of professional service. So, yeah, I think those were the kind of the 3 main challenges, or the groups of organisations and people to convince. And needless to say, there were and are remaining challenges. Yeah, that's my perspective from sitting in our lonely office back in July 2016, which I'm now happy to say is a much busier and fuller office, and the floor still needs cleaning, but it's at least there are more people now.
Thank you very much, Phil. So I think that introduction or these opening statements really open up the floor to what we want to do now, to discuss with all of you what you take from that model project now that you've gotten to learn a bit more about it, how it's functioning, how it has been set up. What would be the questions you would have? You've got the unique possibility now to speak to these 3 experts who can tell you all about the project. What is your impression of, has it achieved its goals? So where should it go in future, perhaps? That's another issue we could discuss. You can ask them all about the challenges they haven't spoken about, because up until now it was more positive than negative, but be assured there were negative experiences as well. So I would just like to open the floor for any questions you might have to the 3 speakers here. Could you perhaps
Hello?
just briefly state your name
that's okay.
and where you're from?
Sorry
Thank
for
you.
having trouble with the microphone. So my name's Amy Grunsky. I work at ORIC. I'm the head of International Pro Bono. And I was talking to Phil in the break after his discussion. I have a couple more questions. So you mentioned other NGOs on the island, specifically the NGOs that work in this space, so give legal advice and do similar work. I went to a panel yesterday with Jones Day and HIAS who work together to do what seems like to me from a layperson a similar thing. Also, there are a couple of other organisations. Do you all link together? Do you work together given you're doing very similar things? That's my first question. And second question is, how long do volunteer lawyers tend to come for? And is there a minimum number of weeks or that you would say is key for lawyers going into the ground?
Thanks very much. In terms of your first question, in the vast majority of cases, yes. There are there are a few organisations doing legal assistance on Lesvos. There's ourselves, there's HIAS, as you mentioned, Greek Council for Refugees, Danish Refugee Council, Lesvos Legal Centre are the main players. And there are not many of us. There are not many lawyers on Lesvos, to be honest with you, maybe even only 15 at any given time. So between those organisations that I've just mentioned, we have a very close relationship. And we work very closely, particularly with HIAS and with the Greek Council for Refugees, because what we do is slightly different but complements each other. So we focus on preparing people for their interview and doing family reunification. HIAS, for example, have a more strategic, maybe, approach. They will take certain issues that they consider to be kind of live issues related to asylum, but maybe not asylum itself. For example, we have worked with them on a lot of cases of people in detention, whereby we will have gone and done the first instance preparation. So we've prepared the person in detention for their interview, and then referred the case to HIAS and worked with HIAS for them to do the appeal against detention, the actual, why this person shouldn't be in detention. So the two elements, the asylum law that we do and the, I suppose, criminal law, effectively, that they do on that front, complements each other. And so we have a very close relationship with those organisations to cross-refer. And with 15 lawyers and 10,000 people, we have to work together. I mean, we are fundamentally all on the same team. And the same goes for the Greek lawyers. And this is something that I think is a very important part of when we were setting up, that it was of crucial importance that the local bar association was happy for us to work on Lesvos and was supportive of the project, and that remains the case. And they were and they are. And obviously we're not in any possible way looking to compete. Quite opposite, in fact. We're looking to support them. I'm confident to say we've never taken a case that a local lawyer would have done, for example. Because they want to do other types of the process, for example, the appeals, or maybe something to do with SGBV or criminal law or violence or something else that we don't do. So we will focus on taking the burden off them to enable them to focus on the kind of the real specific and specialized Greek law elements, because first instance preparation is probably 90% the same across Europe. It's fundamentally the same. A Spanish asylum lawyer, a German asylum lawyer, a Greek asylum lawyer, fundamentally that preparation is the same core elements, the 1951 Convention criteria, whereas Greek lawyers obviously are specialized in Greek law. So they should, and our belief is that we should work to take the burden off them to enable them to focus on the specialist Greek law areas that otherwise, well, they may not be able to do. Yes, we do work very closely together. In relation to your second question, the minimum period for a lawyer to volunteer with us as a volunteer lawyer is 3 weeks. We also welcome legal volunteers, legal assistants, who will come from between 3 weeks to 3 months, even longer in some cases. On average, each volunteer lawyer probably volunteers with us for about a month.
So interesting. Oh, thank you. I've never been accused of having a quiet voice, so I wasn't sure I was going to take it. But I'm Lisa Friedman with Kids in Need of Defense, based in the United States. I am curious about, you mentioned in this morning session 40%, I think that 40% is what you said, receiving legal preparation from ELIL, if I'm pronouncing it right. With all the NGOs together, do you have a sense of what percent is receiving preparation? So that's one question. I have a couple. Do you want me to set them all out? Or one by one? Okay, one by one. Okay, so that's one. Two is if anyone is representing the asylum seekers in the actual interviews, first instance interviews, and that may be a Greek bar issue. I don't know. I'm just curious, but is anyone actually doing the interviews? And then on appeals, it sounds like the Greek Bar Association is doing some appeals. Any sense of, sort of what percent of folks are represented on appeal, and also if that's something ELIL looks at as well? Thanks.
Great, thank you. In terms of the first question, so yeah, approximately, and it's not scientific, but approximately 40% of the cases are people who we have prepared before their interview. We were able to get that's a pretty accurate number, because we at various points have been able to get lists, anonymized obviously, lists of people who each day do their interview, and then we've cross-checked it with our cases. So it's about that. In terms of the total number, I estimate around 50%. So I think, and the reason for that is that the other legal organizations on the island work kind of they take a small number of cases and they run them from A to Z, all the way through the process. So they'll prepare them for their interview, they'll do their appeal. If there's something else related to it, they'll do that as well, generally. We are broader, so we focus only at first instance, so we don't do any appeals. We focus at first instance and focus on providing as many people as possible with advice, with assistance. So we do a much greater number of cases than other legal organizations, but they do it kind of all the way through the process. I think both elements are critically important and go together. Indeed, as does strategic litigation. There are some organizations on Lesvos who take a tiny number of cases, but for strategic litigation. I think all elements have to go together. But very roughly, I think the other organizations together do maybe 10 to 15% of the camp. But again, that's not very scientific. In terms of representing asylum seekers in interview, we represent some of our cases, but it's a capacity issue. I mean, ultimately, from a theoretical perspective, we believe every single asylum seeker should have a lawyer for their interview, preparation, representation, for the appeal as well. The problem is, as I said, with 10,000 people and 15 lawyers, it's impossible. So what we do is we represent certain types of cases. And there are two types that we represent, whereby we will prepare them and accompany them to the interview and then write the memo afterwards, which is minors, alleged minors who have been incorrectly registered as adults. We will always represent those cases, and that's will only be done by one of our two Greek lawyers. So the European lawyers don't do the representation, only the Greek lawyers. And people who are exceptionally vulnerable, which is a more difficult category to define, because ultimately everybody in Moria is vulnerable in one sense or another. But for example, somebody who is an SGBV survivor who literally cannot talk, who just cannot describe what happened, and the lawyer will go with them to obviously provide legal assistance, but also kind of moral support in that sense, to give them the opportunity and help them to actually explain their case, or for a case that's been really unusual for whatever reason. Finally, in terms of the appeals, so as I said, we don't do appeals, but, and this is an interesting issue because it goes to the issues we've been talking about before as well about responsibility. Under Greek and European law, the Greek authorities, the Greek government, the Greek state has a responsibility to provide a lawyer to everybody who has their appeal. And currently, well, for the last 2.5 years, they have maybe achieved that for 6 months. The rest of the time, it was provided by a local Greek NGO supported through UNHCR who did it. Then there was a state lawyer who was supposed to then do it, but the state lawyer quit in May and hasn't been replaced. So currently, people who are at the appeal stage don't have a lawyer either. So it's a theoretical protection, but in reality, one that doesn't exist.
Thank you very much. I'm Alex Papachristou, a U.S. lawyer, despite the Greek name. And I'm curious whether you've had many U.S. lawyers volunteer. You pay 500 euros as a stipend to get there. That doesn't sound like enough to come from the U.S., so perhaps not. But if not, what the feasibility would be, in your view, of that. I'd also appreciate understanding a bit about the post-asylum process. When someone gets asylum, that's asylum in Greece. So I guess that means just leaving Lesvos and going somewhere else in Greece. But if you can explain that a bit. And then those who are denied asylum and don't have an appeal, if you could run us through that. And I guess the specific question I'd ask is what you'd assess to be your capacity for volunteer lawyers. How many could you handle if there was an unlimited supply? If you don't want to put it that way, just to get a sense of how you see solving the problem overall. Thanks.
Let's start with part of the answer because I would like to kind of try to give you a part of the answer from the perspective of bars and law societies in Europe. First, coming back to your question, it was a policy decision to do first aid, legal aid. The main reason Phil already gave, there was an unmet legal need. There was a gap because there is no legal aid whatsoever for preparation for the first interview. So knowing that resources were limited, it was a policy decision to say that's what we do. Now in the second stage and everything that came further, we as organizations also said, although we have a great, and all the volunteers have a great intrinsic motivation to do as much assistance and representation as possible, we have to also look at the law and also at what the local bars actually want and how far they would want to welcome us. And this is something that is also a learning from this project. We said, we can't just go there because we see there is a need and say we know it better than the local people. So we had a lot of discussions with the local lawyers, and so we tried to find a way of collaboration, which Phil then already described quite well. And that's one of the reasons why we actually self-restrained and self-restricted ourselves in the work of the project, with the exception of those few cases that Phil described where actually there's more than just first aid. And now I come to your question. It was also a policy decision to say which kind of legal advice and then legal representation is without any problems possible under European professional law. And that would be that European lawyers admitted to a European bar actually do this kind of work. We were kind of sitting there, actually I remember, and wondering, and actually it's good that you asked from an American perspective, because the picture we had in mind was, let's just imagine we saw a real crisis on the Mexican-US border, a refugee crisis. That was 3 years ago. And we said, what if a group of European lawyers would just go to the United States and say, we want to give legal advice because we know how to do it, and we don't really ask you if we are welcome to do so. And that's why we thought it might be better to stick to European law that allows, and that's very new to us, that allows every European lawyer to give legal advice and represent also in every European Union country, which didn't exist 15 years ago. 15 years ago, every lawyer was restricted to their own county or something like this. So it is already a European project to be able to go cross borders, and that's why we restricted the project as a policy decision to lawyers admitted to a European bar. We did do some collaboration with organizations from the United States, International Bar Association, American Bar Association, but I understand there was no lawyer so far who was only admitted in the United States. One thing we are thinking about, if there is a need, and there is actually quite a number of American lawyers who wanted to volunteer and who said, can we help? We were thinking about, and Phil, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, that everything besides the actual advice and the actual representation, there's so much legal research and things to be done actually in the office that could easily be done by an international group of lawyers, and we wouldn't have to respect European law limitations. Was that a correct reflection of those things? Yeah. Which might, and I also should say this, which might sound funny in a way because it's a restrictive attitude, kind of, but keep in mind where we come from, that such a European project with a very conservative profession, where the majority of the profession is not like you all here at the PILnet conference, but the majority of the profession actually looking at limiting others to come into their fields and slowly actually becoming or getting a more international mindset. We think that this is already something that is a lot more than a couple of years ago would ever have been possible. And we are, as long as we're on the right way, I think, then we will get a lot more international cooperation when that is possible. I don't know if that answer satisfies you. From an American perspective, I would be glad to hear your answer to my answer.
Well, I wanted to hear the answer to the last question about the capacity. Because I think that was a fun question. Okay. The other one is a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Cord is absolutely right, and I agree with him. And we have had American lawyers, but American lawyers who have been members of a European Bar Association. And I think that that is an important point because, again, it's the commonality of the European system, which maybe makes it much easier for a German lawyer to volunteer in Greece because it's basically the same system. Whereas maybe the system in America is not the same. So it's not so transferable. Now, I speak from a position of ignorance there, so maybe I'm wrong, but that was kind of a little bit behind our thinking as well, to make it as easy as possible. And we have had American volunteers. We have had legal assistants, interpreters from America who have supported us, but not, as Cord said, not a specifically American-only or non-EU-only lawyer. Just quickly about the couple of points that you mentioned before the fun question. Post-asylum, people then get, a refugee will get the same rights as a Greek citizen. What that means is not a great deal in reality. So there's no welfare state in terms of welfare as we would understand it. There's free healthcare, there's the right to education, but these are not concrete things. So actually in many cases, believe it or not, people who get refugee status have to stay in Moria because there's nowhere for them to live. They don't have enough money to rent a house. So you have this kind of ridiculous situation in that sense.
I'm sorry. They have the same rights as Greek citizens, but not as EU citizens. Is that right?
Well, in terms of...
In terms of being able to leave Greece and come to Germany, for example?
No. So they can
So it's not the same rights as Greek citizens?
Not in that sense. Not in terms of travel, no. In terms of welfare, I was meaning. Okay. In terms of travel, people who've been granted asylum can leave, I think, for 3 months in any 12-month period. So you could come to Germany for 3 months, but then you need to go back to Greece.
And I'm sorry, do you consider that restriction to be legal under European law?
Yes. I would defer to our expert here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, whether or not it. Well, yes. I mean, that is the law.
The European Convention on Human Rights and such.
And then just about the rejections, if somebody is rejected, then they will be returned to Turkey. So there is no return to home country. So if you're an Afghan and you're rejected, you'll be returned to Turkey. You won't be returned to Afghanistan. The only exception is if somebody takes IOM, assisted voluntary return and repatriation, but everybody else is returned to Turkey. Very quickly about the number of volunteers. If supply was unlimited, I think realistically that 6 volunteer lawyers is a good number for Lesvos. But if we had more, then obviously simply we'd be able to do more cases. I think that I don't know what the number would be to be able to do all of the cases on Lesvos, because in some cases people don't want legal assistance, they might not want it from us and various other things. But I think this goes back to what Noemi said as well and what we've touched upon previously. This was intended to be a kind of a pilot to see if the model works on Lesvos. I think we can say it works. So the next step will be to then implementing that model in other locations, whether it's Athens, whether it's other Greek islands, whether it's Spain, whether it's Italy, using the same basic model. And I think more volunteers there, and if volunteer supply was unlimited, then it would be something to kind of fuel that development in that sense.
Okay, let me just make one administrative remark before we go on. We're actually shortening your lunch break right now, but I'm happy to do that. If you're happy as well, we can continue with a couple of additional questions. The official limit of this workshop is now, but I guess we can just go for a couple of additional questions, and one was back there.
And there will be a second workshop, and if anybody is not able to get his or her question answered, please come back after lunch break. Right? Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Vincent Vogt. I work for refugee law clinics on Chios and in Athens, so a partly similar and partly different project. I have 2 questions. One concerns that you mentioned that your optimal is that any asylum seeker has a lawyer to prepare for the asylum interview. And when we look in the German context, I would say that especially welfare organizations have a big capacity of social workers and asylum law counselors that take a lot of capacity to prepare people for their asylum procedures, and less lawyers involved in the first instance procedures than even in Greece. In my personal experience, it's not a statistically valid thing I say now. How do you evaluate this? Would you also want to transfer a model where everyone has by a lawyer preparation to Germany, for example? Is this also a policy of the German Bar Association? And my second question is, I heard in the beginning that you said you don't take EU funding or government funding. Is that a policy decision? Is this, or do you see advantages in this? Or would you be willing, if somebody offers you EU funding from SCIA or ECHO, to take it?
Can I just add another question on this, because it's about refugee law clinics as well? Just to add, I'm from the European network of law clinics that we have in Europe. And I actually, it was a question on the CCBE, because all the discussion that emerged is that actually we need also Greek lawyers working in this area and really expert in this area, and we have not enough Greek lawyers. And I think law students, also Greek law students, are missing actually on the ground. And I think there's something that could be done. And we were with the European Network for Clinical Legal Education. We were in contact with the CCBE training committee, in particular to enhance clinical education European-wise. I was wondering whether CCBE has, or your committee on migration asylum, have thought about helping, maybe establishing law clinics in law schools in Greece that actually could be the the catalyst of a new, generation of lawyers working in this area, which I feel it's much needed. So maybe the question whether you have considered this and whether we couldn't have a discussion on it.
Okay, thanks. Just the second part of your question. It's not a policy decision. It's just that we have to start the project, and it was an urgency to start the project. So we start to ask to the other legal orders that come from they are parts from CCBE to fund in the project. Afterwards, we try to ask some funding to EU institutions. And I'm talking about the first part of the project, the pilot project, and the response were no. So so that's very very easy to answer. So sincerely, maybe we could say that it's a positive thing that finally we managed to have the fund by ourselves. I mean, for the first part of the project, because right now we are in another stage and we need to be funding by other organizations, and we need to have this money. If someone who would like to participate, it's a good point to do right now. But at the first stage of the project, it was only funded by members of bars and the councils of different EU members. Okay, and for the first part, it will be maybe Phil that will answer you. And for your question about training in CCBE through the Foundation of European Lawyers or the European Lawyers Foundation. They have launched, I think it's the second, I'm sure that it is the second training that we have launched about migration and asylum law. This year, the training will be on migration and asylum law, but specialized also in migrants, in children, migrants and refugees. We had a project 2 years ago that it's called TRALIM. Now it's TRALIM 2. And we prepare lawyers, but it depends on the legal orders that they want to participate or not. It's not common to each member of a CCBE. I mean, we launched the project, and if the legal orders want to participate, it's up to them. So the first TRALIM were, if I remember well, with Spain participate, Greece, Italy, Ireland, and Poland. And the TRALIM 2, this time we have France and another country. I'm so sorry right now, I don't remember. And also we participate as we are observer in the Council of Europe. We launched and this is free. Also a course on it's online on asylum and the ECHR. And right now there is another course that has been launched in several countries at the same time. Last week I think it was in the UK, and in the coming weeks it will be in Italy, France, Spain, and Greece about children, refugee and migrant children. So this is the trainings that we are working on and that we are launching. It's not only the umbrella of CCBE, it's also with the European Lawyer Foundation.
Just maybe to go back to the first question about preparation by a lawyer or a social worker and what kind of the balance is. I won't touch the subject of what the DAV's position on this is, and I don't have any competence or power to talk about that. But from our perspective, I think It's a very interesting question, because undoubtedly, obviously, it goes without saying that the work that non-lawyers do in helping prepare people for their asylum claim is invaluable. I think the key point, or maybe a key differentiator in terms of Lesvos, Greece, compared to Germany, for example, may be that one of the things that was most shocking to me, going to Lesvos, working in Greece, coming from London, coming from working in the UK, where, if a law changes, it takes months, it takes years, it goes through committees, people input, parliament input. In Greece, it took 4 days. It took 4 days to do an entire new asylum law. And suddenly it's presented, and this is the law, and you have to fill in the blanks because nobody knows how it works. And because of that, what we have seen is a constantly changing procedure. And Lesvos is the laboratory for European asylum policies and European asylum law. It's where the European Commission will try different things to see if it works and see if there's a backlash against it, to be honest. I mean, we have the PILnet project, which is only in Lesvos, which is where people from 28 different nationalities arrive. If they arrive and there is space in the detention centre, they will be put in the detention centre for the entirety of their legal procedure for no reason other than they are from one of those nationalities, which only happens on Lesvos and is something that is seems to be something that's been trialled there. Equally, the vulnerability, the EU-Turkey deal is an obvious example as well, but particularly in terms of vulnerability, is somebody vulnerable or not? Do they fall under the EU-Turkey deal, or do they fall under the normal asylum procedure? These are all complex, extremely complex things that I suppose crucially are ever-changing. So you don't have a constant set procedure that is going to be the same until another asylum law is passed in 4 years' time. It can change literally week to week. And that is something that maybe is an element that may make it more difficult for non-qualified practicing asylum lawyers to keep up with the pace of it. Because, I mean, even lawyers who've come 35 years experience as part of ELIL, have been like, what's going on? This procedure is crazy, and it takes time to get kind of on top of it. So I think maybe that would be one of the reasons why it may be a little bit more difficult in the Lesvos context.
Okay, I'm the bad guy here, so I have to finalize and wrap up this whole workshop. I'm really glad there's such a lively discussion, and everybody here on the panel is, of course, available for questions after the workshop as well. So during lunch break or whatever, you can approach each of us here. I'll just give the opportunity, if you want, to the panel members if they want, give a short closing remark or.
This almost sounds like we shouldn't, but I want to say I want to say one word, which has nothing to do with refugee and migrant assistance, but with the fact that we are at PILnet here, and that we are talking about a project in which big law firms like Dentons, who actually supported the project incredibly, and thank you for that, and bars and law societies and civil society kind of work together in a way that, in my opinion, doesn't happen so often. I see that bars and law societies are very often kind of one kind of bubble of the legal profession, and then you have the pro bono family with big law firms, civil society, which is also a certain group of people who communicate with each other quite a lot. And I would really like to see this PILnet family network to approach bars and law societies and tell them, collaborate. You are the professional bodies, and you have a certain power to do things, to get things done. We don't want to do this only with our law firms and with civil society. And if this is kind of one of the learnings from the European Lawyers Project, I personally would just be very happy. That has nothing to do with refugee law, but I think this is what comes out of a conference like this from a bar association perspective. So thank you very much for organizing all this here.
And just allow me the last closing remark. Nobody should leave that room with the impression that ELIL doesn't accept funding. They do, and they're grateful for it. So if you want to support, you're welcome to do so.